Okay, training time. Good morning. My name is Ivan, and this is Sophie. We're from AFP. We work in the Paris newsroom. Um, this is going to be, we're going to make you work a little. It's more of a workshop than a lecture or a presentation. Okay, I think everyone's settled. If you are here, it's maybe because you are tired or frustrated when you get an announcement by a company saying they're net zero, or they have a new sustainable product, or they're clean or net zero, right? Does it happen? Do you see it? Anyone works in a business desk? Business, kind of? Yeah. Sometimes do you handle sometimes corporate press releases or announcements at COP, if you go to COP, lots of CEOs are there. Listen to, do you know Saudi Aramco, the world's biggest oil company? Yeah, that's his CEO. I'm gonna need the sound on this. His CEO in October 2021. That was right before COP26. And in the lead up to COP, it's coming. In the lead up to COPs, tons of companies are making grand announcements. And I really like this one. Is this coming, maybe? It works. Hold on, just a second. Where am I? Is there someone behind the computer? Oh, yes, okay. Can you bring me back to the slide? Working on it, okay. What we're going to do today is a kind of an adaptation, a very short version of a training we do in-house at AFP. It's really to give you tools and a method to deal with that kind of announcement, such as the one you're going to see. In the meantime, I want to say something about news fatigue, since we're waiting. Check the digital news report from the Reuters Institute for Journalism from this summer. There's no specific news avoidance for climate. There's more news avoidance for Ukraine news, for COVID news, for business news, for celebrity news than for climate change. So it's 20,000 people they interviewed in many countries.
So an announcement, I am also excited to announce that Saudi Aramco will achieve an ambition of being also a net zero from our operation by 2050. So we have also an announcement.
Right? That sounds familiar? Many companies are going for net zero. And we're in the business of breaking news. So we need to know we have a few minutes to decide what we do with this piece of news. We don't have a week to analyze it. And it's actually possible to do breaking news on this kind of announcement, but be objective and fair and give good information to the reader. This is Nike moving to zero. If you buy Nike shoes, it's on the box. French oil company Total, which was renamed Total Energy, in 2020 adopted a new climate ambition to get to net zero by 2050. This is Unilever launching a sustainable laundry capsule. MasterCard planting 100 million trees. Of course, last year we had the first so-called carbon neutral World Cup. Was it carbon neutral? Did it contribute to global warming? Yes. Our friends at Net Zero Tracker there's just a boom of companies announcing some form of net zero carbon neutral pledge. They look at the 2,000 largest companies in the world by revenue. Basically, is there a laser? Yeah. basically half of them are here. Half of them now have some form of net zero policy. Can be 2040, 2055, who cares? But half of them, I mean, if you're a big company and you have not announced that you're net zero, well, you don't, I mean, never mind. Of course, the labels don't help. This is an initiative that was launched a few years ago called Race to Zero, backed by the UN. 10,000 companies almost 10,000 have signed up on it. But among them, you find this, an LNG terminal in India. So some companies are actually doing something to change the way they do business to address climate change. Some do, but some are misleading, and we're not helped by the lack of standards in the world. There's a lot of ways people can write in press releases on their website that they're going to zero when they're actually not, because no one has defined what going to net zero means. So there's a gap between what readers will hear when they see, oh, our company is racing to zero, and what the companies are actually doing. But we are not, we have tools, and we can do something as journalists, and it's not very hard. So today we're going to look at the basics of carbon accounting. And anyone knows about scopes 1, 2, 3? I have a feeling I have a good crowd here. Yes, raise your hand if you know what scope 1, 2, 3 means. Okay. We're going to go through some questions you should ask when you get this kind of announcement. We're going net zero. And what is greenwashing in the end? And the fun part is going to be a case study. You're going to work. If you don't have a laptop, you can use your phone, but it's better on the laptop. So I'll make you work on a case study. And the last part is going to be with Sophie.
So, hi, I'm going to talk to you later, but just to say I'm going to talk about a different training that we have created at AFP with experts at AFP that's online and that's open access for all journalists, not just a workshop like this. And I work on tackling disinformation. So it's an online training on focusing on climate disinformation, but I will tell you more at the end of your workshop.
Let's go with the basics. What is scope 1? First, companies have a way to count their greenhouse gas emissions. There's a method that's nearly universal, but it's far from mandatory. But most people will use it. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And this Greenhouse Gas Protocol divides a company's emissions in 3 scopes. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. So anyone wants to scream what Scope 1 may be? Emissions from direct activities. Yes, okay. Scope 1 are emissions that occur from sources that are controlled or owned by an organization. Literally, you have to do the burning. If you burn some coal yourself as a company, or some oil or some gas, and there's literally CO2 coming out of your facilities or your vehicles, that's part of your direct emissions, your scope 1 emissions. So if you're on airlines, you're burning kerosene all day, all the CO2 coming out of your planes, you count that in tons of CO2, that's your scope 1. That makes sense? Okay, what is scope 2 then? Now we've removed all the oil and gas and coal that you can burn as a company. What is scope 2? Gerhard, yeah. Oh, hi. No, supply chains, no. Not yet. Energy, but not all gas and coal, right? Because that was in your scope 1. So that's going to be your electricity, basically. So this timeout studio is using electricity. Anyone knows where the power plant is? Hmm? Yeah, here. Where is the power coming from? In Lisbon, is there a nuclear plant or? It's a serious question. Hmm? Okay, so maybe a bit of solar, maybe a bit of gas. Okay. So all the greenhouse gas emissions from the power plants that are supplying this electricity, this power, okay, that's, you agree there's some greenhouse gas emissions from that, right? From the use of that electricity. That's your scope 2. Right? Definition is indirect emissions because you, as a company, you do not own the power plant, but you're basically buying electricity, and all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that power are part of your scope 2. Scope 1, scope 2. Also, if you buy heat, so if you have district heating, that's part of your scope 2. But for the sake of this exercise, just remember that scope 2 is electricity. Okay? And what we call operational emissions is scope 1 and 2 altogether. So when Saudi Aramco pledges net zero emissions for our operated assets, remember? What do they mean? They mean Saudi Aramco scope 1 and 2 are going to go to zero to 2050. But of course, what is the main source of emission for Saudi Aramco? Louder. Yeah, they're selling oil, but they're not burning the oil, right? They're selling it. You are burning the gasoline in your cars, right? So actually, for an oil company, maybe 90% of their carbon footprint is going to be scope 3. It's going to be all the rest, basically. Scope 3 is all the rest of your indirect emission, and Gerhard, your supply chain is going to be in there, okay? So indirect emissions upstream and downstream from productions are your scope 3 emissions. Just a few examples: business travel, employee commuting, emissions from product the company is buying, so all your suppliers, and also all the emissions associated with the use of your products. For an oil company, of course, the emissions associated with the burning of the kerosene or the natural gas that you're selling. It's really, really important to have that clarity about what scope 1, 2, and 3 mean, because the companies are really good about this. They're way ahead of the media in how they frame their climate communication. And that's how they talk internally. They won't necessarily write scope 1 in the headline of the press release, but that's what they mean. So Saudi Aramco actually committed in 30 years to zero out their scope 1 and 2. They haven't said anything about their scope 3 emissions, which is maybe 90% of their current carbon footprint. Another way to look at those is scope 1 is burn, scope 2 is buy, and scope 3 is beyond. You can go on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol website, GHG Protocol. And you can see in scope 3, for instance, there's 15 subcategories. You don't need to learn this, but you can look it up on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol website. Yeah, scope 3, basically think about it. You're sitting on scope 3, right? The chair was made by someone who spent energy, who sourced material from the ground. Those companies, those suppliers, used a lot of, generated a lot of carbon emissions, okay? And that's the scope 3 of whoever bought those chairs. Does that make sense? So when you deal with a company saying something on climate, there's no way you can do some good reporting without checking whether they've done the basic step of transparency, which is reporting, publishing, reporting on their own emissions. You wouldn't think of covering how a company is doing financially without saying their product P&L, profit and loss. Thank you. Without seeing their revenue and the net profit. It's the same if you want to deal with a company announcing sustainable laundry capsules or claiming some kind of climate action. You need to see how many tons of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 they've emitted last year or currently. And actually, most companies now do it. You can find the reports online. They do publish it. We'll get into whether we can trust those numbers in just a few minutes. But that's the basic step. So at AFP, we would never cover some companies announcing something if they don't have a nice table in their annual reports with the tons of CO2 for each category. You need to understand how the carbon footprint of a company is structured. Where are the emissions coming from? Is it the trucks? Is it the planes? Is it the factory? Is it the supply chain? Is it the financial investments? You need to understand that. Just summarizing, the greenhouse gas protocol is universal, but it's not optional. There's mandatory reporting emissions. There's mandatory, in a lot of countries, you have to report environmental data and climate data, but they usually don't tell you how. And it's really optional. You can pick and choose the method you like. And even within the greenhouse gas protocol, you don't have to report every subcategory. It's really optional. So never compare emissions, published reported emissions between companies. There's a standard coming called ISSB. It's very nerdy. I'm sorry you cannot read it, but it's the International Sustainability Standards Board. It's very institutional, it's very complicated, but it's quite easy. In fact, it's the people who do the financial accounting standards, the IFRS foundations, which are applied today, mandatory today in 140 countries. Those people, supported by G20 and a lot of countries, they've come up with climate standards. Their first climate standards. What does that mean? That means over the next 2 years, you'll see some companies reporting their greenhouse gas emissions based on this standard, which you will be able to trust much more, especially if the countries make the standard mandatory, then they really have to follow the standard. We're not there yet, but I think it's being structured slowly and slowly. And again, net zero, carbon neutral, sustainable, clean, green, eco-friendly, all of these are not well-defined terms. So when I edit a story, I try as much as possible to remove those terms and just be factual. Just see what the company is actually doing from their own numbers. So for instance, when you have a big announcement like this, what do you ask? First, I ask, does this that's from Danone a few years ago, the dairy company, yogurt company. When you get an announcement like this, first question is, does the commitment cover scope 3 emissions, right? So we saw with Aramco, it didn't. Very important, does the target rely on carbon offsets? Many companies will claim they'll be net zero in a few decades, but their emissions are actually growing. And all they do is they do a transaction and they buy carbon offsets to zero out their carbon footprint on paper. And we have experts on carbon offsets in the room. I'm not at all an expert on this, but as a journalist, you ask the company, okay, how much are you going to reduce your absolute emissions? And how much are you going to rely on carbon offsets? Because the goal, of course, is that every company lowers and zeroes out or gets as close to zero for their emissions. Another question is, does the company commit to just a faraway net zero 2050 target? Or does it have interim targets, which are much closer? And I would give more importance to commitments that are for 2025 or 2030 than a flashy net zero 2050 commitment. Because when you have a target in just a few years, you need to change the way you do your business today. You need to change your strategy today. You need to change your governance. There's a lot of things you need to change today. So, yeah, give more prominence to earlier announcements. Top red flags in press releases. Of course, now you've understood that when you see a commitment for operational emissions, be very, very careful, because that may only cover 5 or 10% of a company. PepsiCo's or H&M, maybe 95, 97% of their carbon footprint is scope 3. So they need to have some form of commitment on the scope 3. Another red flag, of course, is when a target, a pledge, likely relies on a lot of carbon offsets. A 2050 target is another red flag. And also when you have a low impact initiative. So if Saudi Aramco puts solar panels on their headquarters, that's what I would call a low impact initiative. Of course, it's good. It's better than a gas boiler, but it's low impact. So let's have some perspective on all the green announcement. Can you read that press release from January 2022? And raise your hand if you see a red flag. Okay, what is it? Yes, ambition. Right, okay, one. There's a big one. 2050, okay, good. Another one? Yeah, I really like this one. Net zero, yeah. Operated assets, thank you. Okay, so when our business reporter in New York received that, in newswires, you need to decide right away. Do you do an alert, which has a bulletin, or however you call it? Do you basically publish it in red, or do you report at all on it? So we did not alert it, but so it's really easy. In just 15 minutes, you realize that this is not as big news as it may look. What do you think of this one? That's PepsiCo. Yes? I would think so, yes. Small impact. But it's good, no? It's still good. But maybe, I think, I have the numbers somewhere, but I think PepsiCo's scope 1 is maybe 1% of their carbon footprint or something. Okay? So get the greenhouse gas data, please. Let's do a case study now. You're going to work on Amazon. So I'm going to give you 5-10 minutes, really quick, to answer 2 questions. You're going to go online, open your laptops. Please find me Amazon's reported 2022 emissions. Okay, and I want to see tons of CO2. Often you'll see CO2 equivalent, because as you know, there are many greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, etc. But for simplicity in carbon accounting, we all convert into equivalents of CO2. So I want to see tons of scope 1, 2, and 3, and see if you can find what Amazon includes in their scope 3 reporting. Okay, and the second, so you choose whether you do question 1 or question 2. And the second question is find Amazon's climate pledge, climate goal. What do they say they want to achieve? So do they have targets by scope? Do they have an interim target? And how much are they going to rely on carbon offset? Okay, go. I forgot to mention, the way to find this is you find a sustainability report, annual report, environmental report, and usually you get a big 400-page PDF. So your best friend, and when you're in a hurry, you Control F, and you look for scope 3 in quotes. And then you should find a nice looking table like this. This is Google, for instance, and they do report tons of CO2 for their scope 1. This is what it looks like, okay? I'll put the questions back. Okay, one more minute, and we'll see where we are in 1 minute. Okay, it's probably not enough time, but did you get at least a start? Okay. By the way, that's the World Cup carbon footprint. Anyway. Okay. Did you find this table? Okay, who wants to talk about it? Did anyone find the scope 1? Yes, okay. What is Amazon scope 1?
So scope 1 here it's fossil fuels and refrigerants. There are, let me see, for 2022.
We have 13 million tons of scope 1 emissions, right? Okay. How has it been going over the years?
It's been going up.
Yeah, quite a bit, huh? Okay. Scope 2. Scope 2, remember, is electricity. How many people found the table in 5 minutes, by the way? Okay. So you see, if you have an hour, everyone would find it. Okay. So scope 2, okay, they don't buy a lot of power. So we would think of Amazon and Amazon Web Services as using a lot of power. Well, actually, within their carbon footprint, it's kind of marginal, right? Okay, now about the scope 3. I'll just highlight it here. It's 55 million tons of CO2 equivalent as reported scope 3 emissions. Who found what this includes? Yes, go ahead.
So I found the verification declaration of Apex. That is the one who's supposedly fact-checking this. So purchased goods and services, capital goods, there's fuels and energy-related activities. That is the gross emission net of upstream transportation and the distribution, business travel, employee commuting, Amazon-provided shuttles only, and certain employee subsidized transit, upstream leased assets, downstream transportation.
I have one question. So, okay, they put a lot of stuff in their scope 3. Does it include the carbon footprint of what they are selling? Yes. No. So they do count. So here's a page that you find on their website. Can you see? They have a carbon methodology PDF, and they would say that it includes Amazon's trucks, and then Amazon product manufacturing. Okay, so they do count all the carbon emissions of everything that has Amazon on it, like I don't know, a charger, Amazon Basics. You all know this, right? But they don't count the carbon footprint of everything else. I mean, the indirect emissions, the scope 3 of all the other products that they're selling. I mean, the debate is open. Should they include the carbon footprint of the millions of products? Well, some retailers will do it. So Amazon does it on its own products. But I'm not going into whether it's good or bad. I'm just showing you that example that when you look at Amazon's own reported carbon footprint, it does not include basically all the emissions generated by the manufacturing of everything they're selling, except when it has an Amazon logo. Mm-hmm. Oh, but carbon accounting is totally unlike financial accounting because you cannot add it up. And a lot of the criticism of the greenhouse gas protocol, the scope 1, 2, 3, is that you cannot add it up, of course, because someone's scope 1 is someone else's scope 3. But so there's a guy in, I think Oxford or somewhere, who has a whole method, like a proposal. He's an accountant and he wants to recreate a carbon accounting that's like financial accounting, but we're not there yet. That's the dominant thing. So the use of this is not to add it all up. The use is to understand how a company impacts climate. Aline? So there's a very factual way to do it. Before we do that, let's just do the climate promise of Amazon. So have you found, and I'll go a little bit more quickly on this. Have you found Amazon's climate pledge? Yes. So Amazon came up in 2019 with something called the climate pledge, where they pledged net zero by 2040. Now it's hard to understand exactly what this commitment entails. What it says on their website is, first, they have to do regular reporting, so they're doing it. And then 2, they're going to do some carbon elimination, and 3, they're going to do credible offsets. But when you look at the reality of Amazon's carbon footprint, is that Amazon is a growing business. They're selling more stuff every year. And their carbon footprint, if you go back to the table, their own reported carbon footprint has been increasing over the years. Right? I mean, they report a total of 70 million tons of carbon. It's a lot. I don't know, France is 400 million tons, the country. So it's like a small country. So the reality behind the climate pledge of Amazon and a lot of other companies, I'm not picking on Amazon, just Amazon is a company everyone knows, that's why I choose it here, is that here's what Aline, here's how I would write it in the story. Amazon is a growing business. Amazon's reported footprint has increased over the years. You can say it's equivalent to X% of your country, Portugal. They pledged something called net zero by 2040, but it did not commit to an absolute emissions reductions. Basically, they're reporting there are about 70 million tons of carbon today. They have not said how many tons of carbon they're going to put in the atmosphere in 2040. They've not said that. And actually, they don't know. It's in their literature. So will they be at 50, at 20, at 100? They haven't said. All they've said is somehow by buying carbon offsets, which they call credible offsets, sure, they'll zero out their emissions. But it doesn't change the reality that they're releasing more and more carbon in the atmosphere today. And we don't know how many tons of carbon they release in the atmosphere in 2040. They haven't said that. So I think it's a very factual, neutral way to report the news. We don't have to use the word greenwashing, but I would avoid saying they're committing to net zero. I would just say, I would just report their current carbon footprint and highlight that they haven't set an absolute goal for 2040. Well, unclear to what extent Amazon will rely on carbon offsets. Sorry for the typo. And so yeah, they're selling, last year we increased sales by 9% and our cardboard footprint remained kind of flat. So there's an effort, probably, yes. And so they would use carbon intensity. We don't have time to discuss carbon intensity, but that's their way of showing some efforts. But if you always go back to the absolute emissions, which is what counts, I think you're in a good place. And of course, offset as source material, and The Guardian and DeedSite have shown, and we have an author, all the 4 authors here today, And there's many studies now showing that offsets are usually not credible, right? Luke, is that fair? Okay. We spent maybe 40 minutes on this. It just shows you, I think, that an hour of training or 2 hours can go a long way in a newsroom. We've done this training to a lot of people at AFP and elsewhere. I think it's easy. It doesn't take a lot of time to bring up climate literacy in the newsroom. And it's not for climate specialists. We do this with non-climate reporters at AFP. Here, even if you don't trust the numbers, you need to understand how the companies are reporting the numbers so you can start challenging them. And so you can start asking the right questions. You would ask Amazon, why don't you count the emissions of everything you're selling? And they'll explain maybe. What kind of offsets are you really working on? Are you really buying? What is your plan for 2040? Do you have an absolute target for 2040? And that's it for the greenwashing part. And but we're big on training, so I'll let Sophie complete with the rest.
Thank you, Yvon. Apologies if you had any questions for Yvon. He will be here over lunch and afterwards, so go and grab him if you do want to carry on the conversation. And sorry, it's very short. We just wanted to make sure that we would give you a little insight, a little bit of an introduction into some other training that, as I said before, is available to any of you to look at online after we finish. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. So I'm not specialized in climate. I work in the digital investigation department at AFP, and what we do is tackle disinformation and try and train our journalists within our department, but across the globe, photographers, videographers, and text journalists, to keep up to date with the increasingly complicated challenge of dealing with mis and disinformation in news coverage. I've got a few examples here. I just pulled up a few examples. They're not climate examples. There's plenty of climate examples, and we have a specialized climate misinformation journalist who only works on those. Just from today, obviously there's a lot. I'm sure you've seen a lot of misinformation around Israel and Hamas, from video games, from the Mexican drug war images. A lot of it's not sophisticated misinformation. It's the same with the climate misinformation that we see. A lot of it is images, simple images, old images, misused images. In Ukraine, we've fact-checked hundreds of claims, pictures, videos from Ukraine. The image up there I included was as all of you, I imagine, we're very interested in trying to have an impact. The story that we fact-checked there was in Kenya. There were riots, demonstrations, opposition demonstrations in March this year, and the Kenyan authorities tweeted pictures to supposedly illustrate the demonstrations, but the pictures were actually old pictures, so they weren't from the current demonstrations. And we confronted them with that, and they apologized, and they tweeted it. And our journalist last week actually won an award at the Africa Facts conference for that fact check on that particular issue. We started in 2017 with 3 people in the digital investigation department, and now they're around 150 around the world. We work in AFP is a news agency that works in 6 languages. We work in 26 languages. So we have a lot of local content that we're responding to. The challenge, this is an old picture that you may well have seen before, but just during the time I've been working as a journalist, it's moving forward so rapidly. And obviously, those pictures there, the 2005, if any of you remember, when people didn't have mobile phones, being a journalist was quite different to when mobile phones came well, everyone had a mobile phone. AI is obviously a major concern for everybody. And within our department, it's something that we are currently still able to fact check most of the time. There aren't any tools around that can particularly completely accurately show that something is AI generated, but we can still use, a lot of the time it's quite traditional fact-checking techniques that still completely work, reverse image search, sometimes getting in touch with a company that can help to analyze audio or video, or looking for sometimes people leave a watermark from the tool that they've used to generate AI. So that's something that we're not seeing that much of yet, but we're seeing it increasingly. We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it in all kinds of situations. So that's, top of mind for everyone. So we created an online platform, thanks to the support from the Google News Initiative, to help train more of our journalists on these kind of digital investigation techniques. And you may have seen it. We launched it last year in June. And we have it in Portuguese. We have it in 4 languages. It's in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. The idea of the platform is it's got very short courses on it, tackling, you can see the titles, they're a bit small there, but things, everything to do with working online, searching online, verifying images online, working more efficiently online, tackling safety online, specific topics, including, we started during COVID, so we had some health examples and tips for general journalists, and now we've added verifying climate claims. So this module, we released it in April, and we made it using experts like Yvonne and others from across AFP who are dealing with working on climate reporting in general. And it touches on greenwashing. It uses examples of what we've done, what we've seen, what we've fact-checked. It also includes resources that you might find useful. We have some of the resources that were mentioned earlier. We might add some more by the end of today. And it's something that we update. So each course is about an hour. So they're short courses that you can do in your own time online, and you can share them with any journalist, journalism student. They're out there for anyone to do. Inside the exercises, like this one, there's, as I said, examples, and at the end of each course, if you complete the whole course, you get a certificate. So we have more than 15,000 journalists now worldwide using the platform. And what is really helpful and useful is getting feedback. We have all kinds of comments. We've got a lot of very, very positive feedback. We have a few journalism schools who've adopted it and are using it annually with their students. The main aim for us with the platform as well is to keep it relevant. So we're constantly updating it. We've been pulling our hair out with the changes from Twitter to X, any tech platform. Obviously, there's some very positive changes as well with tools that are getting even more efficient. But there's the aim for us is to keep it relevant for our own journalists and for any other journalists who want to use it. So the URL is there. It's a bit small at the bottom. But yeah, please go ahead and use it if you're interested. And if you have any questions, otherwise we'll go to lunch and I can answer them there.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Do we have about 5 minutes for questions if anyone, before lunch, if anyone wants to ask anything to either Ivan or Sophie? Any questions? Yeah, I'll bring you the mic.
It's just a general thing with this greenhouse gas emissions accounting. There is a standard. I was a little bit irritated. Okay, so this new thing which is being, because there is an IPCC standard where you can account all methane, not only the greenhouse gases in the production. Canada is using it partly. But this is a different thing. Because I'm not,
This was really strictly speaking about companies. I'm not talking about state and territorial emissions.
They are trying to apply it for also companies, not only the state. And this is linked to the EPCC report standards, which were fixed. I sometimes wonder why everybody does their accounting. Yeah. No, if I understood it right, the V220 now decided to start a new thing.
The reality is that most companies today will use the greenhouse gas protocol. And so that's the tool we need as journalists. You need to understand it. So many different methods exist, standards, labels, they do exist, and I'm far from an expert on it. But
yeah,
from
me neither. It's just I recently heard about it, and I sometimes wonder why the accounting is so difficult. Okay. Yeah, well, that was it.
In the digital course, is there any specific section about conspiracy theorists? Because they're becoming a kind of a special category.
We don't have a separate category, but it includes training and it's not only the one on climate, but the others too, but specifically in the climate one about what you can verify and publish as what we advise our journalists and what you can't, or what is much more challenging, and just helping you in the day-to-day journalism work out what you can actually publish and fact check, basically. Conspiracy theories is a whole other, within conspiracy theorists, that there are elements that you can verify and that you need to verify and make sure that your newsrooms are verifying. And then, the bigger picture is way more challenging, as you know. But in a 45-minute course, we don't have all the answers to that, unfortunately.
Maybe one up. Got one there.
About the digital investigation techniques, the courses, how are they then included in programs at the college or university level? How does that work?
So we've been into some universities and journalism schools in different countries to explain what they are, and the heads of the journalism school, for example, in Paris, the two big journalism schools who liked the courses, and then the journalism school itself decided to ask all their students to do it every year. So what we do now in Paris is then we go in at the start of the year. They've told the journalism students to do the courses during their summer break, and then we go in and answer questions, give examples of more recent work that we're doing, and it's like it's an individual initiative from each school, but every time we do it, we seem to get more and more who are interested. And there is a possibility. If there was a journalism school in Portugal that was interested, we could probably organize something. So, or in any of the languages that we work in, we do everything we can. We have people who are in different countries. So, we're really happy to help that happen if there's anyone who's interested.